Over the years, I played countless games. I was lucky enough at the age of 7 to have started off with a Nintendo Entertainment System way back in the 80s. And way back then, hearing the beeps and boops in the other room as my parents tested the console before presenting it to me on Christmas was very magical, very exciting. I knew at that moment they got me the Nintendo, and ever since then, I've been addicted and in love with video games. Matter of fact, that game that they were playing in the other room was Duck Hunt, but also bundled with that game was Super Mario Brothers. And it was all over after that. Day after day, I had to get to the next level. I had to be Mario. I had to cross every platform, cross every jump, hit every box, get every mushroom, and every fire flower. I just had to experience more games. Contra, Battletoads, even Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, Roger Rabbit, The Legend of Zelda in the gold cartridge. I just had to try more. See, back then we had rental shops. Yeah, you can go to the store and buy them for a hefty price, but the best way was to rent the games or borrow them from your friends.
You're playing with power.
That's how I tried these games out. Yet, Super Mario Brothers was the moment I fell into that rabbit hole, and I've been falling ever since. Several years later, the Game Boy came out, and in my possession was a portable system, bundled with Tetris. And yeah, I was addicted to Tetris for a while, and so was my dad. But there was just that one game that made me obsessed even more. Metroid, The Return of Samus. Yes, it was my very first Metroid game, and first game that made me think. It had one of those difficulties that you could literally ask your friend to help you and hand over the Game Boy to them so they can help you beat something. The portability aspect really ushered in sharing video games at a grand scale. Not just at home, but now anywhere. And that to me was exciting. Even though Metroid The Return of Samus was a single-player game, for me, this was the beginning of portable gaming, the way it should be. With friends, anywhere you go. This game also had an emotional impact on me because at the time my grandfather was very sick, and my very last words were talking about the story of Samus from Metroid, and the next day he died. Not only that this game reminds me of how good portable gaming was, but it also reminded me of how good my grandfather was, and that life is too short since it was my first death I've ever experienced. My mom died a couple years after my grandfather, and I just fell into this void where I just could not play video games. So yeah, there was a time where, real life sunk in, and, there wasn't really a game that stood out. High school came and went, and adulthood came. Right after high school, it was party, smoke, drink, lots of things. I was playing a lot of Dreamcast and Nintendo 64. All these people from school would come over to my house, we smoke, we drink, we play some GoldenEye. We play a lot of new Dreamcast games on that Dreamcast, like Shenmue. We played a lot of Resident Evil Code Veronica.
Don't move.
But at the same time, I was just very irresponsible. And I had to move from place to place and to motel, losing jobs left and right. So I had to sell a lot of my video game systems and my video games. Luckily, I had a friend from high school that rescued me, and I became his roommate, and I got back on my feet little by little. This is where I got introduced to the PlayStation 2, And my first game on that was Final Fantasy X. I was very impressed how good the PlayStation 2 handled visuals and storylines in a lot of the video games. A lot of the video games were starting to become like movies, and I was very impressed. And Final Fantasy X was a very good example of what the PlayStation 2 had to offer. Little did I realize that the PlayStation could offer so much more. You see, there was this game that I was playing before I moved into a motel room, and it was called SOCOM. And it was until I started playing SOCOM 2 from my motel room where things started lifting off for me for online gaming. I was isolated in this room and couldn't really go out and do anything because I didn't have a car. I looked forward each day to log on to the servers and play with other people across the world. It's like SOCOM 1 before it. SOCOM 2 amped up its game with its close quarter maps and strategic gameplay. If you died, you would have to wait until the next round. If you were trying to go for that bomb and you die, you have to wait until the next round. There's a big focus on teamwork, and at the same time, connecting with other players across the world really helped me not feel so alone in that motel room. SOCOM 2 to this day has always been my favorite multiplayer game of all time. So I got sick of living in my situation and got out of it, with some help of course, but I found a nice job as a cook, helping elderly people with their needs, and I was making some money and had my own apartment. I started playing the Nintendo Wii and the Nintendo GameCube, trying out new games on the PlayStation 2 as they were coming out. I eventually got a cheap PC and ran this game called World of Warcraft. I started playing this near the end of the life cycle of the very first release of World of Warcraft. I got into this large fantasy world where you could do anything pretty much. It made you feel powerful and like you had a purpose in a living, breathing world. Yes, the world was fantasy, and I really didn't get into fantasy games all that much until I started playing this. I would play hours and hours each night just so I can level up and be on par with my friends who were at higher level. This game really provided a sense of exploration, social interaction, and oftentimes strategic elements with its dungeons and raids. I really rate this high on my list of favorite games of all time. So there was a shooter on the scene called Counter-Strike Global Offensive. I never played any of the games before it, and now I understood why there was so much hype around it. It was one of those games that made me feel like I was playing SOCOM again. There were a lot of familiar elements like defuse the bomb and rescue the hostages type game modes, including no respawn when you die. What made this game so special though was the fact that you had to really be good with your aim. And I wasn't really much of a PC gamer when it came to shooting games. Yeah, I played Call of Duty and some Battlefield games, but I never really got into precision-based shooting, and for me this was a high selling point. This forced me to be good at my game. If you've never played this game before, I highly recommend it. Definitely one of the best games on my list of games to play. So here we are in the modern era, and Nintendo had announced this portable hybrid gaming console called the Nintendo Switch. I had to get Zelda. I had to get it in my hand. So I got Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and I was hooked immediately. I was hooked on this game system, the Nintendo Switch. This system and this game revitalized my love of what gaming was really all about. You had the handheld aspect where you could share it with friends and take the games with you. And you also had the aspect of plugging it into a dock and playing it at home and continuing where you left off. You had console and portable all in one. This brought back my love of gaming, of what it's really all about. This game was not overly serious, it looks good, plays good, and you basically can do whatever you want. It was refreshing to go back to Nintendo and being reminded that these games are not overly serious. And Zelda, the Breath of the Wild did this. It just refreshed my love of what gaming is all about.